Greetings, I'm Enriched Eggplant and welcome to Dungeons and GURPS. In this video I'll tell you how I would make D&D-style psionics in GURPS. Psionics is something of a contentious topic in D&D. Some people hated it for feeling out of place in a fantasy game. Some hated it for a very arcane mechanics such as combat and defense modes. Some people hated it for being overpowered. The latter stemmed from people not reading the rules in D&D 3.5, and as far as I heard, it really was overpowered in older editions. Personally, I love psionics. I feel that it brings a lot to the game both from the mechanical and world-building perspectives. But how do you do it in GURPS? GURPS already has a nice framework for psionic powers described in detail in GURPS Psionic Powers. It doesn't introduce anything new, it's just an example of using GURPS powers, and a very good one too. As always, I suggest ignoring the rules and mechanics and focus on converting the concept. In my opinion, simply using GURPS psionic powers does the trick very well, but there are some moments that require extra attention. First, by default, the psionic power modifier makes your psionic abilities prone to supernatural countermeasures, which is the anti-psi power, and to technological negation via psychotronics. A traditional D&D setting might have such devices as ancient relics or futuristic tech brought by aliens, but they would be extremely rare, simply not enough to warrant a limitation. GURPS psionic campaigns suggest replacing psychotronics with psychobotanics in low-tech games, but does not provide any examples. I took it upon myself to write up some examples based on psionic drugs from GURPS Psi-Tech. The goal was to have concoctions that would make you resistant to psionics or that would let you neutralize psionic abilities of others, that are affordable and not very uncommon. That should be a good alternative to psychotronics. Then you have to consider some optional rules. GURPS psionic powers has several of them. They might seem minor, but they would still affect the game. There are ability crippling rules that will add a lot of depth to your game. In my opinion, an important thing to consider is whether you can take psi and anti-psi abilities at the same time. I think that since mages have such spells as Dispel Magic, then there is nothing wrong with psions combining psionic and anti-psi powers. Then there's two abilities that may also belong to the anti-psi power, that is Psidar and Psi-Sense. This is optional, but I feel that they fit the power well. There's also several abilities that may replace other abilities or be allowed in addition to them. Telekinetic Control, Telespeak, RL Exoteleport and Spirit Communication. Personally, I only allow Telespeak and RL Exoteleport from that list. There are also entire optional powers in the end of the book. Animal Telepathy, Dream Control and the possibility of splitting Psychic Healing into Biokinesis and Psychometabolism. I prefer not to use animal telepathy, not to intrude upon the niche of druids. Because of this, I also disallow the animalism technique for emotion sense and telecontrol. Dream Control is a very situational but also extremely interesting power that basically opens up another dimension for you. Also, I do split Psychic Healing into Biokinesis and Psychometabolism, while also removing the Cure ability entirely. I prefer to limit supernatural healing, but that's a topic for another video. Pyramid Magazine has a lot of support for psionics. Pyramid 3.9 has a new ability, Control Limb. Pyramid 3.29 has a large article that expands the psychokinesis power, including the sonokinesis sub-power. Pyramid 3.69 has a Psi Blade and Psi Sword abilities, new techniques and perks. Pyramid 3.20 and 3.63 have additional teleportation abilities, including ones that create a pocket dimension. Pyramid 3.49 has a plant telepathy and world singing powers. I like these ones. If you're going to use them, you have to define the IQ of your world. Pyramid 3.97 has a psychic recovery skill that should be useful to those who employ techniques often, and also a bunch of new techniques. Pyramid 3.99 has a necrokinesis power. Pyramid 4.3 has a chronokinesis power, that is actually my creation. GURPS Aliens Sperials has a new ESP ability, Clairosmia. Aside from that, I have created some powers and abilities for psionic characters that were missing for a complete D&D experience. That includes meta-creativity, psionic enchantment, draconic psi, and some additional abilities for various other powers. I will link the ability index in the description. The psionic ones are at the top. One rule that is not included in GURPS psionic powers but that should be used for D&D-style games in my opinion is restricting telepathy to sapient beings. This applies accessibility only on sapient beings, minus 10% limitation to most abilities. For the sake of simplicity, I have recalculated the cost for all telepathic abilities and I will link the table in the description. If you remember D&D 3.5, you probably remember that there are multiple classes. The Psion and Psychic Warrior I covered by the rules I described here, so I have nothing to add. The Wilder channels raw emotions into psionic manifestations. There's many ways to represent this, including the Wild Surge ability, but I prefer to add Backlash, Mental Stun, Resistible minus 5%, and Costs Fatigue, 1 FP minus 5% to all Wilder abilities. I think this represents emotional draining quite well. The Soul Knife is easier. Basically, the signature ability of the Soul Knife, the Mind Blade, is just a psychokinesis ability. You can either use a Psi Sword from Pyramid 369 or use the Mind Blade I started up on my blog. I prefer my version because I just don't like strength-based innate attacks. I find natural weapons much more elegant. The Divine Mind is a very weird class. I feel that the source material doesn't do a good job with the concept, and I prefer a similar concept that was introduced in a third-party supplement called The Mind Divine by Dreamscart Press. In that book, psions can gain their psionic powers by worshipping god minds, powerful quasi-divine entities. I came up with a few god minds for my setting. Basically speaking, each one is a separate psionic power with an additional pact limitation. I will link it in the description. The Lurk and its cousin Psychic Rogue do not have anything in their description that makes them different from the Psion. The Lurk's description in general looks like a word salad that only exists to pad out the word count. The Erudite and Ardent are interesting classes, but I have some issues with them. The Ardent, while interesting, has another word salad description that doesn't really say much about how his psionic powers work. So I cannot really represent that in GURPS, and the Erudite basically describes GURPS psionics. There's also the Psionic Artificer, and I think that this niche is covered by the Psionic Enchantment ability. There are also a couple of Mind's Eye articles on the Wizards of the Coast website that talked about sub-psionics and subverted psionics. Sub-psionics, psionics that tap into the subconscious mind, should have Backlash, Mental Stun Resistible minus 5%, and Low Psychic Signature 2 plus 10%. This makes them dangerous to use, but also harder to detect with supernatural abilities, useful for subtle powers. And this option should only be available for ESP, Meta-Creativity, Necrokinesis, Psionic Enchantment, and Telepathy. At least that's how I do it. Subverted psionics use the Taint or Corruption. In GURPS, just slap Corrupting minus 20% limitation and call it a day. And that's it for this video. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one.